On April 20th and 21st, 2024, Jupiter will be joining Uranus in the sky, a conjunction that happens every 13 years on average, or 7 to 8 times per century. In this video, I'm going to cover important events that happened throughout the 20th century during Jupiter and Uranus conjunctions. Events like the discovery of the fundamental principles behind quantum mechanics, the invention of television, the moon landing, and the spark that united worldwide protests now called the Arab Spring, all happened during or exactly on this important planetary alignment. Before we get into the dates and events, let's talk about what these two planets signify and what happens when they align at the same point in the zodiac. First, Jupiter is the planet that expands whatever it's influencing. It makes us see life from the bird's eye view. It brings higher levels of knowledge, wisdom, and understanding into our consciousness, all which help us feel good about our place in the cosmos. Jupiter generates or gives life to things, and it's the planet of our creativity, of children, and the belief system and ideology we create based on our experiences. Uranus is a planet that brings sudden new things into our lives, often in the form of new and innovative ideas, new people who we may not have much in common with on the surface, but with whom we share a common purpose, and opportunities and events that give us the spark of inspiration that deepen our consciousness's connection to our divinity. The new and original things Uranus brings into our lives helps us to liberate ourselves from whatever is old and outdated. What makes these two planets harmonious is that they rule over similar elements. Jupiter is a fire planet, but it doesn't rule fire, it rules the element ether, which is essentially the underlying fabric of the universe through which all of the other elements flow. The ether is undetectable by modern science, and it's what they call dark matter. When a mother has an immediate intuitive feeling that her child is in danger, but the child is in another part of the world, and then later finds out at that exact moment the child felt fear during an intense situation, it is the ether that is psychically connecting these two people together. In astrology, we don't say that Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto rule certain elements, but Uranus corresponds to the fire element, but on a more subtle level, making it the planet that corresponds to the electricity flowing through the atmosphere and technologies that require electrical currents, wavelengths that flow through the air such as Wi-Fi, and thoughts or ideas that seemingly come out of nowhere, and inspiration that strikes us like lightning, and of course lightning itself. So these planets are very similar in their expressions. They are both creative and stimulate us to feel inspired. They both help us generate ideas. Jupiter as a comprehensive philosophy we build over time, and Uranus towards newness and innovation. So once every 13 years during their conjunction in the zodiac, there is an increased power for innovation, generating abundance and sudden events that open up new terrains of thinking, not just on the world stage, but especially in our personal lives. These events can serve as a stimulus or the initial sparks for new paradigms for ourselves and also for humanity. Before we jump into the timeline, it's important to remember 3 things. 1, not every conjunction produces a spectacular event that gets recorded into history. So keep in mind that of the billions of people on Earth that could experience profound events that no one ever hears about. And again, I'm going to stress the importance of where this conjunction is happening in your natal chart. It's happening at 21 degrees in Taurus. So look at your natal chart. Whatever planets or house cusps are at 21 degrees of Taurus, within about 5 degrees on either side, that's the area of life and the force in your consciousness, the planet, which is going to be affected by this conjunction. 2, the conjunction is on a specific date, April 20th or April 21st, depending on where you are in the world. But for a couple of weeks leading up to and then after the conjunction you can think of as heating up and cooling down periods. So in this case, April 4th, when Jupiter is 3 degrees from Uranus, up until the exact conjunction is the heating up period. And then after April 20th until May 8th is the cooling down period, when Jupiter pulls away to the point of 3 degrees from Uranus. And 3, because of retrograde motion, or the planet moving in the opposite direction of the zodiac for a period of time, there can be 3 conjunctions during 1 year period. So Jupiter will pass Uranus in the zodiac, Jupiter will go retrograde, pass over Uranus again, Then Jupiter will then once again go direct, passing Uranus for a third time. Typically, but not always, the most important of these three conjunctions is the final conjunction. October 20th, 1900. December 14th, 1900 is considered the birthday of quantum physics because the German physicist Max Planck delivered a presentation to the German Physical Society on what is called black body radiation, stating that electromagnetic energy could only be emitted in quantized form, which is defined as the amount of energy a photon particle is able to carry. What became known as Planck's law laid the cornerstone to all of quantum theory, and this discovery won him a Nobel Prize in 1918. At first, Planck was uncertain of a working theory of his experimental findings and had to work backwards to derive an equation. It was the week of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction when Planck finalized his theory within just a few days, and on October 19th, one day before the exact conjunction, he laid out a theoretical sketch to the German Physical Society, and within a week his assistants confirmed the law. He described his finding as a lucky intuition because the theory worked, but he was unsure of exactly how. In other words, it broke away from classical physics in such a fashion that the implications would only become clearer in the coming decades, particularly by Albert Einstein, who expanded upon Planck's law beginning in 1905 and 1906. In summing up Planck's law, Oliver Passon and Johannes Greb Ellis state, historians of science agree that discoveries are rarely attributable to a particular moment in time and sometimes not even to single individuals. They are rather extended processes that involve the interaction of several researchers. But it is often possible to single out individuals who have finally pushed this development to a point from which there could be no retreat. According to Kuhn, Planck is an example of this. Quantum mechanics fundamentally altered the way we think about the universe and how energy is distributed within it. Although December 14th is considered its birthday, it was actually during the week of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction when its foundational principle was proposed, somewhat reluctantly and with what Planck himself described as lucky intuition. This series of events during the week of the conjunction was nothing short of a philosophical breakthrough that would eventually change the way scientists view the natural world. March 4th, 1914. Of the 9 conjunctions I'm going to be discussing in this video, this conjunction and also the conjunction in 1997 were the 2 quietest conjunctions, and what's interesting is that they both occurred in Aquarius. But a notable Jupiter-Uranus themed event was the landing at the River of Doubt by former President Theodore Roosevelt and a team of explorers 1 week before the conjunction. Landing at and surveying the river was the object of their expedition, which was only inhabited by indigenous peoples at this time. The journey was an educational success in discovering new plant and insect species, though it was wrought with disease, lack of food, and even a murder, which resulted in the murderer being abandoned in the jungle. It is this conjunction in 1914 and also the conjunction in 1997 that keep predictive astrologers humble and not quick to jump to grandiose conclusions for major events to inevitably take place when these 2 slow-moving planets meet. We'll see that events that will happen on this conjunction later in this century and into the 21st century will have much bigger ramifications and impact. If only astrology were as easy to say something major will happen every single time these 2 planets meet, but it's not always the case. A trio of 3 conjunctions in 1927 and 1928. The early 20th century was a time of immense innovation thanks to the Industrial Revolution of the late 1800s in Britain, Europe, and the United States. A trio of Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions beginning in July 1927 and culminating in January 1928 coincided with an invention that would change the world forever: television. Wired and then wireless radio signals had been developed over the course of the entire 1800s. The first transatlantic wireless radio signal was sent by Guillermo Marconi in 1902. The first practical radio messages were sent as weather reports to farmers in Wisconsin via Morse code in 1916, and vocal and musical broadcasts were later developed there. and the first visual information was by a Scottish inventor named John Logie Baird in 1926. In January 1926, Baird assembled some of England's most distinguished scientists to his laboratory and sent images of them via wire from one room to a receiver in another room. He would eventually extend the distance to 14 miles and then 430 miles from London to Glasgow. He was a lone genius with a couple assistants, but his operation would expand thanks to Jupiter's coming transit with the innovative planet Uranus, beginning in 1927. He established his company, the Baird Television Development Company, and their first meeting was on July 18, 1927, 3 days after the first Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of this trio, which was on July 15th of that year. As I explained in the introduction, this was the first conjunction of the 3 that would happen in this 8-month period of time. Because of retrograde motion, the energy of the conjunction is sustained for a longer period of time, and the results climax at the final touching of the planets on the 3rd conjunction. On January 19, 1928, 6 days before this final conjunction, the New York Times ran a front-page article, "Television Across Atlantic Declared a Fact." Baird and his team had been doing secretive experiments for 6 weeks, sending signals from London to New York with success. The official experiments to prove their findings were held on February 9th, 2 weeks after the conjunction. The managing director of Baird's company, L.G. Hutchinson, said at the time, "We are at the beginning of an era when the electrical eye will enable people to see distant friends in any part of the world. Color possibly will enter the field in the future, and one can only visualize a physician ordering a tonic for a patient perhaps hundreds of miles away. Now that the question of transatlantic television is entering the field, there should be in the future immense possibilities." You can think of this trio of Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions, and any astrological alignment for that matter, as an energetic environment that are conducive or not conducive for certain earthly activities to take place. The conjunctions in 1927, 1928 helped Baird to expand his research, start a commercial enterprise, Jupiter is the planet of wealth, and send electrical pulses through the atmosphere and connect 2 distant societies. It can be argued that no invention impacted the world more profoundly than being able to send images to screens from a distance, and the conjunction of these 2 planets over the course of 8 months helped manifest a radical new technology into reality. May 8, 1941. This conjunction happened during the height of World War II, a time of destruction and death on multiple continents, which dampened the inventiveness and abundance that this conjunction brings. However, there are 2 highlights during the week of the conjunction that marked breakthroughs on a wide scale. And keep in mind some of the results and themes of this 1941 conjunction, because the 2024 conjunction is happening in Taurus, as this conjunction was happening in Taurus. The first event was the world premiere of impresario Orson Welles' masterpiece, Citizen Kane, still regarded today as one of the best films ever produced. It was marked by its breakthroughs in its dynamic storytelling, but more pointedly, it was innovative in its brand new cinematographic technique called deep focus, which allowed the viewer to see objects in the foreground and background in perfect focus. Citizen Kane was the first film we studied in Film History 101 when I was an undergraduate student, and its entertaining quality alone makes it valuable to watch and rewatch, not to mention that it was Welles' very first film. It was an artistic and commercial triumph, premiering in New York on May 1st, Chicago on May 6th, and in Los Angeles on the exact conjunction date, May 8th. The film was controversial even before it was shot, starting with Welles' unprecedented contract that stipulated the right to the final cut and complete artistic control, and the film's subject matter being an indirect portrayal of the newspaper tycoon William Randolph Hearst, who fought legally to have Welles sued for libel and also tried to have the film destroyed. Even upon its release, it was heralded as one of the best films to have ever been made, and the New Yorker's critic John C. Mosher said it was like fresh air and something new has come to the movie world at last. The film's release was a big event, and the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction threw fuel onto the fire of an already brilliant set of circumstances. The film rocketed Orson Welles' reputation as a genius into the stratosphere, made him enormously financially successful, and showed audiences new technical possibilities in cinematic art. The second event in 1941 that coincided with this conjunction was on May 5th, 3 days before the conjunction was exact, when the Emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, re-entered the capital city Addis Ababa upon the defeat of the Italian army by British forces during the East African campaign of World War II. Selassie had been in exile in England since 1936, and May 5th is celebrated to this day as Patriots' Victory Day, essentially the Independence Day of Ethiopia. The conjunction's effect on Haile Selassie's return was that of jubilation. Jupiter is the planet of joy, and the beginning of a new era of freedom from the colonialist powers. Uranus is the planet of breaking free from outdated limitations or ideas. The nation saw reforms such as the abolition of slavery, modernization of infrastructure, and international recognition because of democratic additions to its revised constitution. Selassie enjoyed universal prestige and respect from other nations, and was and still is regarded as an incarnation of God by Rastafarians. A trio of conjunctions in 1954 and 1955. 13 years later, during the next Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, was the beginning of another major scientific breakthrough with the formal establishment of the Conseil Européen pour la Recherche Nucléaire, what we know as CERN. September 29, 1954, when Jupiter and Uranus were less than a degree of ecliptic arc from one another, is known as the birthday of this monumental project that continues to this day, whose purpose is nothing less than to discover the secrets of the known and unknown universe. The idea of the project and acronym were proposed in 1952, but the complete formal ratification was during the conjunction in 1954, like a law being written and proposed for a few years, but it doesn't go into effect or have any force until it is physically signed by the authoritative parties. It is easy to see the Jupiterian qualities present. CERN is a major multinational project aimed at advancing our knowledge on the fundamentals of reality, an attempt to decode the ether, the element that Jupiter rules. Recently, the CERN scientists claimed they had found the God particle, a semantic linking of spirituality with material science. Uranus's influence is the fact that the project is completely original in its approach and seeks to break through our current paradigm of understanding. It is all about discovery and literally breaking subatomic particles into pieces and studying them, something that has no precedent and has required billions and billions of euros to sustain. In fact, CERN is planning to turn on its particle accelerator on April 8, 2024, the exact date of a total solar eclipse. Outside of its press releases and official announcement, there has been some questioning and speculation of the true purpose of CERN, given that it has received unheard of amounts of monetary funding that could have been invested in citizens and infrastructure, and also the sculpture of the Vedic deity Shiva on its front lawn, which is the deity of destruction. Some people speculate that CERN is attempting to open up portals, while others claim its activity is causing the Mandela effect. When heavy scientific funding is spent on such an enormous project, one would expect there to be more to the story and more results than simply research papers. What are the practical implications of a project this large? It may take another 70 years to get an answer. But the point is that it was during a Jupiter and Uranus conjunction when this institution was officially created, which gave the underlying energetic environment of innovation that was able to expand on a large societal level. Given CERN's trend to acknowledge spiritual matters, on their birthday, thus forth, they should add, on the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of 1954, CERN was born. The following two conjunctions in this trio caused by Jupiter going retrograde were less monumental for world events, but one significant occurrence was the formal acceptance of West Germany into NATO, which happened during the third conjunction on May 9, 1955. It was described as a turning point in the history of Europe because of the manpower Germany had in resisting the Soviet Union. Less than a week later, the Warsaw Pact was signed, affirming the alliances that would become the two sides of the Cold War. This trio of conjunctions all happened in Cancer, the sign of foreign territory and adapting to one's surroundings. The formulation of multinational agreements in terms of scientific discovery and military strategy requires a great deal of adaptation and cooperation, which the sign Cancer helped to foster between the nations, all with their own diverse interests. A trio of conjunctions in 1968 and 1969. This next trio of Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions would create one of the most important events in all of 20th century history, the Apollo 11 mission and landing on the Moon, which happened on the exact Jupiter-Uranus conjunction date of July 20th, 1969. We'll look into the sequence of events that led to this monumental day in history, but first, the first of this trio of conjunctions was on December 11th, 1968, when the 30 million Yuan robbery happened in Tokyo, the largest robbery in the history of Japan, and to this day is still unsolved. Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions create an energetic atmosphere of a kind of thrust and power to make big things happen. A sudden robbery of so much wealth, again Jupiter is the planet of abundance and wealth, was conducted using the threat of a bomb exploding, a very Uranasian quality. Jupiter went retrograde in January of 1969 and passed over Uranus again on March 11th. Between March 3rd and March 13th, the time that Jupiter and Uranus were within an orb of 1 degree, was the time period of the Apollo 9 mission, which was the final testing period to see if the propulsion systems on the lunar module could descend and ascend the main spacecraft. The mission was considered a complete success, and the stage was set for the actual moon landing. Jupiter went direct again on May 23rd, and once again began approaching Uranus. Apollo 11 launched on July 16th, when the two planets were a mere 26 minutes of ecliptic arc from one another, essentially already conjunct, and the landing of the lunar module took place at 4:17 Eastern Daylight Time, when Jupiter and Uranus were 23 seconds of ecliptic arc from one another. As you can probably already see by now at this point in the presentation, this event had all the elements of the conjunction of Jupiterian and Uranasian energy. Jupiter expanded the horizons of the possibilities of humanity and manifested a new frontier for exploration of new realms of knowledge and understanding of the cosmos. Uranus helped successfully push humanity to another technological level, and the idea of landing on the moon, which had been an aspiration of humanity for many decades if not centuries, had finally arrived. It could be considered the greatest technological breakthrough of all time. As mentioned, Uranus represents everything that moves through the air, and nothing quite equaled what the Apollo missions were able to send through the air. However, there are many theories that punch holes in the story of the Apollo missions, and that the entire ordeal was essentially a made-for-TV event to put American dominance on full display. The first steps on the moon by Lance Armstrong were broadcasted on live TV, and some people have pointed out, how could television signals be sent through a vacuum of space? A vacuum is by definition nothing, and so it would be impossible to send a signal through it. There is certainly a motivation behind achieving a successful moon landing, the aforementioned idea of American dominance, and of course the unlimited governmental funding that would follow. NASA currently receives more than $50 million every day. If there were astrologers working at NASA, they selected the perfect day for this event to happen, whether it actually happened or not, because what it did was usher in a new era for humanity, which had an effect on the consciousness of every person from that day forward. It also ushered in a massive wealth transfer to NASA from that day forward, a faucet that is unlikely to ever be turned off. It will be interesting to see if SpaceX, Elon Musk's space venture that has received subsidies from the US government, will follow suit and choose astrologically powerful days for breakthroughs in his rocket program. A trio of conjunctions in 1983. The next conjunction, 13 years later, marked a sudden and epic devaluation of the Venezuelan currency, the Bolivar. On the exact conjunction date, February 18th, today known as Viernes Negro or Black Friday, The Bolivar collapsed 75% in a matter of hours, and eventually by 100%. It was partially caused by their leaving the gold standard in 1930 and fixing their currency in terms of the US dollar in 1934. Viernes Negro was a single day that changed Venezuelan history, and its economic situation has never recovered, and in some respects has only gotten worse. Today, Venezuelans in Venezuela actually use US dollars instead of the Bolivar because the Bolivar's exchange rate will change radically in the course of just one day. This shows that just like any planetary alignment, not all Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions are experienced as a positive or desirous turn of events. The planet of wealth meeting with the planet of sudden change can usher in an entirely new reality that makes life more difficult, which forces each person to grow amidst trying and conflictual circumstances. The final connection in this trio happened on September 26, 1983, when nuclear holocaust was averted thanks to the quick thinking of a Soviet lieutenant colonel named Stanislav Petrov. Tensions between the US and the Soviet Union were at all-time highs, and the US had been recently sending bombers straight towards Soviet territory only to peel off at the last minute in order to test the Soviet Union's radar vulnerabilities and their nuclear capabilities. On September 1st, 1983, a South Korean passenger jet had been shot down by the Soviet military, killing all 269 people on board, including several Americans and a member of the US Congress. Because of this hair-trigger reaction of the plane straying into Soviet airspace, the Soviets were on high alert for possible retaliation from the US. 3 weeks later, in a bunker near Moscow, Stanislav Petrov was the commanding officer on duty. Shortly after midnight, their satellite-controlled missile defense systems reported one intercontinental missile flying straight towards the Soviet Union. Petrov reasoned that this might have been a false alarm because if the United States were to initiate a nuclear war, they would send hundreds of missiles and not just one. No missile arrived, confirming his suspicion. A little bit later, 4 more missiles were shown to have been heading straight towards them, and he again thought this was some kind of malfunction with their detection systems, although this had never happened before. Once again, he was right, as the missiles never arrived. While thinking little of what he did as anything special, and he didn't even tell his wife about the incident, he was heavily scrutinized by his superior officers and was commended for his quick thinking and cool restraint, facing the possibility that nuclear missiles were headed straight towards Moscow. The incident was not publicly known until 1998 when he published his memoirs, and in 2013 a Danish documentary called The Man Who Saved the World was made, commending him as an unsung hero of the Cold War. The incident happened one day after the final conjunction of a trio of Jupiter and Uranus conjunctions that year. Things that fly through the air, first the passenger jet being destroyed, then the intercontinental missiles, and the completely unexpected radar detection are all the signatures of Uranus. Jupiter's influence on this conjunction was of a wise teacher, although it was not revealed until many years later, by Petrov not overreacting to the possibility of a nuclear first attack. He had this instinct and intuitive awareness that prevented a senseless and unimaginable level of destruction, as if an angel, or in this case Jupiter, was tapping him on the shoulder, calming him down and saying, "It's nothing but a false alarm." Once again, humanity had been led off the ledge of a full-scale nuclear war. And in this case, I thank Jupiter for giving Petrov, in that split second of time, a sense of calm. He was able to access his common sense, and there was a practical wisdom given to him that ended up benefiting all of humanity. February 16th, 1997. This conjunction and also the conjunction in 1914 both happened in Aquarius, and they were the two quietest of the conjunctions during this century. But 3 days before the exact conjunction, on February 13th, the Dow Jones closed above $7,000 for the very first time, and during this period of time was a very strong economic period and a strong stock market. Jupiter is the principal planet in financial astrology, and its movements in your natal chart are important to see gains and losses in wealth, generally speaking, as there are other factors involved. But besides the strong economic trends and gains, this was another relatively quiet conjunction. The only other notable news was that a week after the conjunction, it was announced the success of the cloning of the sheep named Dolly, which actually happened the previous July. Since this event was already in process for the previous 6 months, and the announcement happened a little bit after Jupiter separated from Uranus, I wouldn't attribute this event to being directly caused by the energetic environment, although it was the first time the scientific breakthrough was announced to the public, which did usher in a new layer to humanity's consciousness that it was possible on a technical level to clone animals, and also laid out the possibility, the potential for cloning humans. A trio of conjunctions in 2010 and 2011. The final trio of Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions before our present-day 2024 conjunction started in June 2010, with Jupiter going retrograde and hitting Uranus again in September. It was the final conjunction that would prove the most monumental, which coincided with the eruption of protests throughout the Middle East, which became known as the Arab Spring. Let's remember that the effects of a conjunction will be felt within about 3 degrees of ecliptic arc, with the culmination happening when the planets are at the exact degrees and minutes, and the effects will carry on until the planets have broken out of their orb of 3 degrees. On December 17, 2010, when Jupiter was approaching Uranus and was within 2 degrees, a man with a small produce cart in Tunisia named Mohamed Bouazizi had his cart and all of his belongings confiscated, and he was allegedly spit on and humiliated by a female police officer. He was refused an audience at the local government office to have his belongings returned, and within an hour of this incident happening, he went into the middle of the street, doused himself with gasoline, and set himself on fire. Protests erupted within hours and continued to escalate for the next several weeks. Mr. Bouazizi succumbed to his wounds and died on the exact conjunction date, January 4th, which caused the protests to become even more widespread and soon engulfed the entire country. Within 10 days, on January 14th, the president of Tunisia had fled the country. This single act of self-immolation is today seen as the inciting incident for the entire Arab Spring, which was a popular uprising in Algeria, Oman, Yemen, Jordan, Egypt, Syria, and Morocco, led by a discontented youth to fight against the corrupt dictatorships in their countries. According to academic Larbi Saidi, Bouazizi's act changed the course of Arab political history and was a breakthrough in the fight against autocracy. Uranus's contribution was the sudden and rapid nature of these uprisings, fueled on by social media, while Jupiter, which is the planet of religious and moral authorities, forced the rulers of these countries to recognize major and immediate changes that needed to be made, or else their authority as rulers would have to be forcibly removed via violent uprising. The history of the Arab Spring is complex and multifaceted because it took place in many geographical locations and with many different results. But it was during the month-long orb of influence of the Jupiter and Uranus conjunction that marked its inception and building into an international movement that changed the lives and altered the consciousness of millions of people. Now that we're caught up to the present day, what can we expect from the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction on April 20th and April 21st of 2024? Let's start with Jupiter and the financial world. Economists have been wringing their hands in anxiety about the national debt and health of the world economy since the Great Recession in the early 2010s. The economy has been essentially kept alive by injections of cash from the Federal Reserve. So far this year, the Dow Jones has been strong, which could be setting up a reversal of fortune come the conjunction. However, since it is an election year, it's rare that the economy is allowed to crash. And just even think about in 2020, when the economy essentially did crash, people were receiving checks in the mail while they weren't even working. This was also an election year. In the world of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, they have been eagerly awaiting the SEC's approval of Bitcoin and Ethereum exchange-traded funds, or ETFs, which would usher in massive capital investment into select tokens and blockchains. Decisions on the Ethereum ETF are expected in April, right on time for this conjunction. Also, what's very interesting is that the Bitcoin halving event is scheduled to happen on the exact conjunction date, April 20th. And what that Bitcoin halving event essentially is when the amount of Bitcoins rewarded to the people who are sustaining the blockchain on their computers and on their servers, they're rewarded Bitcoins. But when the Bitcoin rewards get cut in half, that increases the scarcity of the Bitcoins in circulation, which traditionally causes the prices to move upward. So Bitcoin advocates and cryptocurrency experts are saying that this is going to lead into many big gains and increased demand for Bitcoin. Because of the expected approval of the Ethereum ETFs, I believe that the financial news during this conjunction will be much more positive than negative. However, as we know with Uranus, unforeseeable new factors are always in play, and new variables can easily get entered into the equation. In my video, When Will the Cyber Attack Happen?, I talk about cyber attacks being predicted by the World Economic Forum, and an electronic computer virus that rapidly spreads between computers internationally is certainly a Uranus-themed variable. And keep in mind, since the conjunction is happening in Taurus, it can also be a time of great artistic innovation. And in our day and age, that means breakthroughs in AI and new technologies, new AI technologies that can lead to more advanced artistic expression. Remember, the last time this conjunction was in Taurus was the Ethiopian Independence Day, when Haile Selassie re-entered the capital city after being in exile. Taurus is ruled by Venus, the planet of diplomacy and creating win-win situations, and Taurus is an earth sign, a sign of the concrete reality on the ground. So the upcoming conjunction can also engender some type of diplomatic breakthrough that has practical implications and not just political posturing and agreements on paper. This can be a very beneficial time for creating new deals and agreements with others in your personal life, finding common ground based on shared values, and even meeting new people who share your values. Jupiter manifests a sense of righteousness, morality, and faith in higher powers, and Uranus can help push those values past the threshold of just words and into action. This is certainly one of the most exciting conjunctions of the slow-moving planets, and the most important thing to keep in mind is where is this conjunction happening in your chart. It will be at 21 degrees in the sign of Taurus, so look in your chart to see what house cusps and planets are within 5 degrees on either side of 21 degrees in Taurus. Wherever the conjunction's happening in your chart will be the area of life, which are the houses, or the forces in your consciousness, the planets, which are going to be impacted. So the force of Jupiter within you, which is your ability to see the bigger picture, your belief system, and your philosophy towards life, your connection to the goodness flowing through you, your sense of abundance, and your ability to create abundance in your life, is going to receive the shockwaves of Uranus, which is the force in your consciousness of liberation from the old and outdated, and our ability to be innovative and original in order to connect us with a more true vision of ourselves. The emphasis on Uranus is the word new, and so a new person, a new concept that hadn't crossed your mind before, or a new pattern will be interacting with your Jupiterian life. And once again, the effects are going to begin on April 4th, culminate on April 20th, and then the cooling down period will last until about May 8th, when the two planets have passed the 3-degree orb from one another. Thank you for listening to this presentation, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. And I'm also very curious to see how this conjunction will be impacting your natal chart and what kind of breakthroughs will be coming through to you as we approach the April 20th date. Okay, thank you.